Okay. We have a short story called The Evil That Came Along with the Secondhand Sofa, the personal experience of the Eminger family. In late August 1996, 34-year-old Patricia Eminger told me that she moved from Anaheim to Fremont, California with her husband Gary and their two children, 5-year-old Wendy and 4-year-old, they're not twins, Mark, because they could not afford a large moving van and were moving into a much smaller house. They had been forced to sell many of their larger possessions, including much of their furniture. When they moved into their new house, Patricia was pleased to discover that the previous tenants had left a large sofa. She ran a dust cloth over the sofa and was happy with how handsome it looked. She couldn't imagine why anyone would leave behind such an attractive piece of furniture behind. One night, shortly after they had moved into the house, Patricia sat alone watching a favorite old movie that she had put in the VCR to help her wind down before bedtime. The rest of the family was asleep. The movie was nearly over when she noticed a dark shadow to her left. However, when she focused her eyes directly on the spot, she could see nothing. Patricia decided that her eyes were undoubtedly becoming tired. It was, after all, nearly 1 o'clock. A few moments later, when she had resumed watching the movie, she saw the shadow again. This time it crossed directly in front of her, moving toward the couch. But once again, when she focused directly on the thing, she saw nothing but the shadows of the dark room. Patricia shrugged, distracted from the movie. "Are you a ghost?" she asked, speaking toward the area in front of the couch where she had last seen the shadow. "I don't happen to believe in ghosts, but if you really are one, you appear harmless enough. Stick around if you want to." Patricia turned off the television and went upstairs to bed. By the morning, she had forgotten the entire episode with the mysterious shadow. The next day was a particularly difficult one for Patricia at her office. After the dinner dishes were stacked in the washer, it felt good to curl up on the big couch with a good book. Ooh, that sounds great. Gary watched television for a while, then confessed that he was quite tired. He gave her a goodnight kiss and headed up to bed. Patricia settled back into her book, figuring she was good for a few more chapters before she became too groggy to continue reading. Several moments later, a peculiar sound caused her to raise her eyes from her book, and she was surprised to see the shadow again. As on the previous evening, it crossed in front of her, but then it settled on the other end of the sofa. "Okay," Patricia said, stifling a yawn. "If you want the sofa tonight, be my guest. I am simply too tired to care. I'm going to bed." The next afternoon, when the Emmingers returned home after work, they found that they had received a message from Gary's older sister, Carrie, reminding them that, as planned, she would be arriving the next day for a visit. At 46, Carrie was 10 years older than her brother. Carrie's husband had been killed in a small plane accident 6 years before. They had never been able to have children, and her niece and nephew were like surrogate children to Carrie. Carrie arrived early the next morning, just before Patricia and Gary left for work. The children jumped up and down with enthusiasm for their favorite aunt. They were especially delighted with Carrie's visit because that meant they could stay home with her rather than attending nursery school. That afternoon, when Patricia returned home from work, she found that Carrie had prepared a delicious roast with all the trimmings. Later, the older woman helped her change Wendy and Mark into their pajamas as well as read them a bedtime story. Yes, it would be wonderful to have Aunt Carrie around for a few days. In fact, she could come visit as often as she liked. Once the kids were settled, the adults made some coffee and settled down in the living room for the delightful business of catching up on each other's lives. During the course of conversation, Carrie commented on the attractive new sofa. "New to us," Carrie said. "The previous owners left it here." Talk of the couch reminded Patricia of the shadow that she had seen the past 2 evenings. Risking their laughter, she told them that on the nights when she had stayed up late, she had been aware of something kind of wispy floating around her. Carrie laughed, affecting an expression of mock horror. Was she to sleep in a haunted house? Gary arched an eyebrow quizzically, wondering if this was some kind of rehearsal for Halloween, which was only a few weeks away. Suddenly, Patricia felt a strange chill shudder through her body. It was as if her disclosure to her sister-in-law and husband had seriously offended the unseen ghosts in the room. All at once, she felt surrounded by ugly, malignant hatred. She experienced a fear of the unknown. Gary wanted to know if there was something wrong, but Patricia decided that she had said enough. Patricia successfully rerouted the conversation to other subjects, but her mind was occupied with a strange shift in the house's atmosphere. Then she became aware of something moving up the stairs toward the children's bedroom. She stiffened with fear as she realized that whatever it was, she had offended it, and it had decided to get even with her by going for her children. Patricia was about to jump up and cry out in dread when they all heard Mark screaming from upstairs. She was several steps ahead of Gary and Carrie as they all raced upstairs for the children's bedroom. "A ghost," Mark sobbed as Patricia held him in her arms. "An ugly ghost was in our room." "You know there's no such thing as ghosts, Marky," Carrie told him. "And even if there were, you know that they would be afraid of your Aunt Carrie." Wendy sat up, blinking her eyes as the sudden light in the bedroom, confused by her brother's screams. "No such thing as ghosts," she echoed, pulling a pillow over her head. Mark continued to cry softly, cuddling against Patricia's breast as she sought to soothe him. "It held out its hand and kept bending its finger at me like it wanted me to follow it somewhere," he said between tearful gasps. After they had the kids settled down, the three adults went back downstairs to the kitchen. Gary poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and asked Patricia if she had tried out her ghost routine on the kids earlier in the evening. Patricia stared her husband straight in the eye and assured him that she would never do such a thing, but at the same time she wanted so very much to tell Gary about the awful, ineffable something that she had sensed heading toward the children's room with malicious intent. She wanted to tell him, but she knew he wouldn't believe her. It was difficult for Patricia to turn out the lights that night. She walked through the house trying to catch sight of the elusive shadow being. It was nowhere to be seen, but everywhere she walked she felt surrounded by cold hatred. The next morning at breakfast everything seemed as it should be. 5-year-old Wendy was her bubbly self, full of cheer and giggles. Only Mark seemed to be aware of a subtle change in the home's atmosphere. Just before noon the next day, Patricia received a telephone call from Carrie. She hated to bother Patricia at work, Carrie said apologetically, but Mark claimed to have seen the ghost again. He said that it was waiting for him in his room. Patricia left work early that afternoon, and when Gary came home that evening, the family went for pizza and a movie afterward. It was her plan to distract both the children and the adults from thoughts of ghosts. Lights went out early in the Eminger home that evening. Sadly, they did not remain that way for very long. The family had been asleep for only a few hours when Mark's terrified screams once again filled the house. As Patricia entered the room, she was shocked by the chill in the air. Although she could see nothing, she was certain that the evil, shadowy force had been after Mark again. It took 2 hours for the three adults to calm the children. For that night, Wendy thought she too had seen the ghost. When the children were once again asleep, Patricia decided that she must tell Gary about the shadow being that she had seen. Her husband listened patiently to her account of the something that moved between the couch and the television set and the sense of evil that she felt in the house. Although she could see that Gary clearly did not believe her, she went on describing the cold, unseen thing that she had witnessed moving up the stairs to the children's room. Gary offered his opinion, which was that there might be some physical or psychological reason why Mark was having ghost dreams, and he made Patricia promise that she would take him to a pediatrician as soon as possible. Patricia was able to set an appointment for Mark for the next afternoon. The doctor seemed unperturbed by the whole affair. He said that many children of Mark's age experience nightmares. He advised parents to stress that the monsters are not real and not to encourage their child's fantasies. He gave Patricia a prescription for a mild sleeping aid just in case it became necessary to help the boy sleep more soundly. The sleeping aid proved to be woefully ineffective against the nocturnal viz of the ghost, for once again Mark awakened everyone with his screams of terror. For 3 nights their son had been victimized in the darkness. As Patricia cradled her son in her arms, she sensed a mocking presence all around her. "If you feel frightened now," the unseen entity seemed to tell her, "be aware that this is nothing like the fear that you will soon suffer." The next day, when Patricia returned home from work, Wendy rushed excitedly to her arms and gave her an enthusiastic kiss as a greeting. When Patricia inquired why Mark did not seem to want a hello kiss, he jerked his face away from hers with a scowl of disgust. "I can't stand you," he snarled. "I don't want to be near you. I won't kiss you ever again." Patricia was shocked and hurt. She glanced at Carrie and saw the look of astonishment on her face. This was definitely not their loving little Mark speaking. That night during dinner, Mark continued to refuse to permit his mother to touch him. His sister could cuddle him, Aunt Carrie could kiss and hug him, Daddy could wrestle and play with him, but Mommy was not allowed to get near her little boy. On her way home from work that evening, Patricia stopped at a toy store and bought presents for Wendy and Mark. When she arrived home, Wendy met her at the front door with her usual kiss, but Mark only glowered at her. Wendy responded to her surprise gift with little cries of pleasure and appreciation. Mark refused even to open the brightly colored wrapping paper, and his lips curled back in a contemptuous sneer. "You can't buy my kisses with presents," he said, spitting out the hateful words. Patricia was determined to remain calm. She could see the emotional turmoil that boiled within little Mark. Suddenly he broke into a run and hurled himself into her arms. "Mommy, I do love you," he cried. "Sometimes I don't understand what—" Patricia sat on the floor and pulled her son onto her lap, kissing his forehead, hugging his tiny frame. Then, all at once, Mark's face changed again. His lips twisted into an evil sneer. With a violent shudder of his body, as if he were repulsed by his mother's very touch, he slid out of her lap. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" he shouted as he ran from the room. "I don't love you anymore." Patricia sat on the floor in despair. Wendy stood near, uncertain what to do. She wanted to comfort her mother, but felt that she should remain silent. Patricia put her hands to her face and began to sob disconsolately. Later that evening, when the children were sleeping, Patricia, Gary, and Carrie sat at the kitchen table to discuss the awful change in Mark's behavior. It soon became apparent that Gary had already made up his mind that their son should see a psychiatrist. "He keeps insisting that he sees an ugly ghost day in and day out," Gary argued his decision. "Now he's undergone a complete personality change and refuses to allow his mother to touch him. I think we owe it to Mark to put away our prejudices regarding mental illness and take him to a psychiatrist." Patricia pleaded for her husband to listen to what she considered the true cause for their son's aberrant behavior. "There is something evil and awful in this house, and slowly but surely it's entering Mark's mind and causing him to act as he does. Don't you see that this thing is trying to possess our son?" Gary replied coldly that neither he nor Carrie saw any shadowy thing moving around the house. Although Carrie had been sitting quietly, reluctant to enter a family discussion of such perplexing depth, she now volunteered yet another possibility. Perhaps Mark resented not having his mother at home. They all knew that he hated nursery school. "Maybe by saying he doesn't like you," Carrie theorized, "Mark is really saying that he doesn't like it when you leave him." Patricia was impressed by Carrie's insights. Maybe she had hit upon the real reason for Mark's sudden change of personality. Perhaps the shadow that she had seen when she was trying to relax after a hard day at work was really a shadow of guilt moving across her psyche, an attempt to get her to stay home and be a good mother. But could they afford for her to quit her job? Could they make it without a second paycheck? Gary answered they could certainly afford it until Mark got better and felt all right again, but about her working. "Maybe the movie and all was just too much for the little guy," he said. Patricia was determined to do anything to help her son. She gave notice at the dental office that next afternoon, and she expressed the hope that the job might still be waiting for her after things got straightened out at home. That night, after everyone else had retired for the evening, she sat up late in the living room, mulling over the bizarre situation. Mark seemed to be sleeping peacefully. Could the week of terror really have resulted from her son's feeling of desertion when she left for work? Suddenly, she felt the room's temperature drop. Warning alarms went off in her brain, and she feared raising her eyes to look around the room. As the death-like chill permeated the room, an atmosphere of hatred seemed to solidify. She knew that something monstrous and evil was in the room with her. This is an illustration. A man performs a dance to drive away evil spirits at a Budapest temple during a festival in Taipei. There in front of her was the shadow that she had first seen a week ago. Both the hands and face of the dark form now appeared lighter, and Patricia was able to make out features on its face. The thing was grossly emaciated, and yellowish-green skin stretched tautly across its high cheekbones. Long hair flowed to its shoulders. Its thin, outstretched arms supported bony hands and fingers that looked like claws. Dark, soulless eyes stared hollowly at her, and the ghostly image curled its lips into a vile sneer. Patricia's body began to tremble as she realized that this was the same sneer that she had seen on Mark's face that day when he refused to accept the toy she had brought him. At last she was certain she knew what the being intended to do with Mark. It intended to steal his soul and inhabit his body. Slowly the loathsome form dematerialized before her eyes. The chill lifted from the room. With a sudden jolt of fear, Patricia ran to the children's room. She sat on Mark's bed and gathered his sleeping form into her arms. Somehow she must find a way to thwart the evil creature's plan to possess her son's body. A sound from the hallway startled her. Unconsciously, with a mother's basic reflex, she tightened her arms around her son. My God, I saw it, Carrie exclaimed. My God, Patricia, I was in the kitchen warming some milk to help me sleep. I saw that thing take shape. What was it? Tears of relief flooded Patricia's eyes. Carrie had seen the thing. Now she had an ally in her war against the hideous shadow creature. It wants Mark, doesn't it? Carrie asked, in a voice barely a whisper. The two women awakened Gary and handed him a steaming cup of strong black coffee. You will listen to us, Carrie told him. More than an hour and several cups of coffee later, Gary could still do little more than shake his head and rub the stubble on his chin. It's all so primitive and superstitious, he said at last. An evil spirit trying to possess our son. How could that be? For several silent minutes, Gary looked into the eyes of his wife, then those of his sister. I've got to believe the word of the two women in the world that I love and trust the most, he said. If you both say that you've seen the thing, then I believe you. Patricia explained that she had come to believe that the spirit was able to draw energy from their thoughts and strong emotions. They must try not to show any signs of fear. Dinner the next evening was very quiet. Throughout the meal, Gary sat lost in thought, scarcely eating his food, glancing cautiously from time to time at his scowling son. Carrie also seemed nervous, and even Wendy noticed that her aunt's hands shook as she passed a bowl of mashed potatoes. Since Mark's behavior had changed, the bedtime ritual at the Eminger home had been altered. Patricia had confined her attention to Wendy, and Carrie had assumed the responsibility of putting Mark to bed. Mark had never rejected affection from his father, yet that night he suddenly snapped at Gary and refused to allow either of his parents to touch him. You've been listening to her lies, the boy snarled, indicating his mother. Now you're as bad as she is. I don't like you anymore either. Let's see how much. Okay. A stricken look crossed Gary's features, and Carrie hurriedly entered the room. And Carrie will help Marky with his jammies, okay? But he had nothing but scorn for his beloved Aunt Carrie as well. Why don't you go home? Mark asked, his voice full of venom. No one wants you here. You're old and fat and ugly. After the three adults left the children's bedroom determined to remain calm, the windows in the living room began to make a fearsome noise. Although there was no wind outside, the glass panes shook violently. Then the drawn curtains began to flail wildly, knocking a vase to the floor and noisily tipping over several framed family photographs on a small table. A number of books flew off a shelf. Gary caught to his feet, his eyes wide with unnamed fear, rather. This is too much, he said. I can't believe these things are happening to me in my own home. Patricia begged him to ignore the manifestations, but as soon as she spoke, she heard a voice inside her head that echoed with malice. You can't ignore me. I'm stronger than any of you. Patricia realized that that thing was communicating with her telepathically. Inside her mind, she defied the intruder. We are stronger than you. We are stronger. Now get out of this house. You are not wanted here. The only reply was menacing, low-pitched laughter. From the look on Gary's face, he, too, had heard the ghastly sound. That's it, he said. I'm out of here. I'm taking Wendy and I'm getting out of this hellhole. Patricia pleaded with her husband, stating that they had to stay strong, but Gary admitted that he couldn't handle what was happening in his home. Things like this were not supposed to be able to happen. He had been taught his whole life not to believe in the supernatural. I can't take it, he said, his eyes wide with fear. I'll be no use to you anyway. Carrie agreed with her brother. Let him take Wendy and go. His fear will only feed the thing. Patricia made one last attempt to regain her husband's support in the fight against the ugly shadow being, but then the two of the picture frames that had been pushed over by the animated drapes exploded loudly, sending glass fragments across the room. I'm sorry, was all Gary could say before he ran upstairs to the children's bedroom to get to their daughter. After Gary had left with Wendy, the window panes began to vibrate with such violence that it seemed as if they would shatter at any moment. The draperies continued to flap noisily as though they were flags on a pole resisting a strong wind. Carrie reached for the Bible on the coffee table, clutched it in her trembling hands, and began to pray for deliverance from evil. Within a few minutes, the wind from nowhere died down, and the draperies once more settled quietly against the windows. Keep praying, Patricia said to Carrie. I'm taking the Bible with me, and I'm going into the kids' bedroom. I think the thing knows that tonight is its last chance to possess him. I feel that it is about to go after Mark with all of its strength. Patricia gathered her sleeping boy into her arms and tried to prepare herself for whatever was to come. Within a moment, she felt the chilling approach of the detestable being, and its ghastly form began to materialize before her. An eerie, sepulchral, I love that word, sepulchral, haze surrounded the entity as it moved inexorably toward her. Its bony arms were outstretched, and an almost irresistible force seemed to flow from its yellow-green claws. Patricia could not empty her mind of the thought that if those vicious hands should ever touch her, her very essence would be ripped from her. The being stepped closer, and for one terrible moment Patricia felt herself faltering. Her mind began to swirl, and she knew that she was losing strength to the entity's demoniacal power. From far away she could hear its soulless laughter. The sound of the pitiless cackle was all that Patricia needed to rally her inner resources. "I will not let you take my son," she shouted at the thing. Somewhere deep inside of herself, Patricia tapped a source of primeval energy. Centuries of culture and sophistication melted away, and she was simply an enraged mother protecting her young. She held the Bible in front of her as if it were a shield and advanced toward the evil creature. "I am stronger than you, you reject from hell," Patricia snarled at the entity. "My love for my son is stronger than your will to possess him." As Patricia continued moving forward, she was rewarded by the sight of the creature beginning to move backward. Feeling a tremendous surge of power and thrusting the Bible toward the entity, she spoke with authority. "God's word is stronger than you are. God's love is stronger than you are. You are beaten. Leave my son. Leave my house. The power of love has defeated your power of evil." The entity continued to retreat, growing smaller and fainter as it moved backward. Patricia continued to hold the Bible in front of her, only dimly aware that they were moving down the stairs toward the living room. Then it suddenly occurred to her that the entity was headed toward the sofa. "So that's it," she exclaimed. "Now I know where you came from, you miserable scum." Patricia could see Carrie was still seated on the sofa, and she could hear her prayers entreating God, the Holy Spirit, and all the saints to banish evil from the house. "Carrie, get off the sofa, right away," Patricia shouted. "The thing is headed for the sofa. That's where it came from." As if moving awkwardly in a dream, Carrie did as she was told. Patricia continued her advance on the being, watching it become increasingly dimmer as it neared the sofa. Its vaguely luminescent quality had vanished, and Patricia was staring at the formless shadow that she had first seen 7 days before. It hovered above the sofa for only a few seconds before it seemed to evaporate into the cushions. Both women were startled by the sound of the front door closing. Gary was returning with Wendy cradled in his arms. "I couldn't stay away," he managed an apology for his former cowardice in the face of supernatural evil. "I thought you might need my help." Patricia kept her eye on the sofa. "Yes, honey, we need your help all night. Take this damn sofa from our home right now." With only the pale light of a crescent moon to guide them, Patricia and Gary made a desperate trip far beyond the outskirts of the city. When they found a desolate spot where it seemed completely safe and far away from any trees or foliage, they dumped the sofa, doused it with lighter fluid, and set it on fire. When the sofa had been completely consumed by the flames and they had stamped out the last glowing sparks, Patricia sighed that it was over at last. Later that night, when she choked in her sleeping... This is the last paragraph. Later that night, when she checked in on her sleeping children, Mark rolled over on his back, sleepily kissed her, and whispered, "Good night, Mommy. I love you so much." When Patricia rejoined Gary and Carrie in the kitchen, there were tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank God," she sighed in a meaningful prayer of thanks. "We won."